It's a beautiful country, and it really sells that spectacular beauty. This is why people know so much about the tourist areas. But behind that beauty, there is so much pain. And there's this bittersweetness that lives in the communities that are hidden behind the cane fields. It's where people know only how to work, and it's where they do what they know how to do. They work hard from dawn until dusk, and they are denied the most basic fundamental rights.
Hi, and welcome to this podcast from Rayjon Sharecare. The Dominican Republic, by many Canadians, is thought of as an escape, a vacation paradise, from when winter gets to be too much. But there's much more under the surface. Today, we will be discussing what happens when over 200,000 people have their citizenships stripped from them due to their heritage, and why almost 10 years later, there are still thousands left stateless. We are joined by three spectacular guests who will discuss what being stateless means to thousands of people in the DR. You've already heard the powerful words of Rosa Iris at the top of this episode, but we will hear more from this inspiring activist and human rights lawyer throughout the episode. We are also lucky enough to be joined by two members of the Rayjon partner organization ASCALA, Maria Eugenia and Michael Abreu, who work with stateless Dominicans every day in the communities that they live. Rayjon Sharecare has been working in partnership with ASCALA for several years, supporting their incredible work in some of the most marginalized communities in the Dominican Republic. In addition to collaborating on initiatives in healthcare, microcredit, and the empowerment of women, we've dedicated particular support to a project led by their strong legal team to assist persons and families of Haitian descent with obtaining the necessary documentation that they need to live, work, and obtain basic human rights in the Dominican Republic. Thank you all for being here and speaking with us. I would love to start off with each of you introducing yourselves in your own words.
Soy Rosa Diendomi Álvarez.
My name is Rosa Iris Alvarez. I'm an international human rights lawyer, and I started off my career with Chaperettes of Mobility, which is now known as ASCALA. I'm a poet and an essayist, and currently serve as an activist, and I see myself as a loyal advocate of human rights. I'm also the protagonist of the documentaries Statelessness and Our Lives in Transit, and I'm a social worker.
I'm really glad that we were able to discuss and share this moment together. I am Hermana Maria Eugenia, Scala Brianna's religious sister. As part of our mandate in Charisma in the Catholic Church, we work with immigrants and vulnerable groups.
I've been in the Dominican Republic and working with the organization ASCALA for 6 years. ASCALA stands for Association Scalabriana at the Service of Human Mobility and operates in east of the country as well as in the province of Bajabon.
Mi nombre es Michael Abreu, abogado.
My name is Michael Abreu. I'm a lawyer, and I graduated 2 years ago from the Central University of the East in law. Since graduating, I have been working with ASCALA on their legal team. Before ASCALA, I had been working with the Civil and Commercial Chamber of San Pedro de Macorís. My work with ASCALA encompasses mostly the legal side of the work, with particular regards to undertaking lawsuits.
Michael, can we start off by discussing what is the current situation surrounding statelessness in the Dominican Republic?
Before being able to start about statelessness, we need to talk about the sentence of the Constitutional Tribunal. This is Law 168-13, and this is the reason for the current situation of a lot of Dominicans living in the Dominican Republic. This law has been recognized as almost a civil genocide because it takes away a lot of the civil rights of Dominicans. This law has a retroactive application, and that is why it is seen as against civil rights. Law 168-13, divides stateless people into two different groups. The first group, Group A, are people who are children of those who were in the Dominican Republic between 1929 and 2007, and they have some sort of civil record such as birth certificates. The other group, Group B, includes people who are immigrants in the Dominican Republic that do not have any sort of civil documents. So the immediate solution for Group A was to transcribe and return their Dominican citizenship, and the solution for Group B was to register in the National Naturalization Plan. which included having to wait 2 years to be able to get their Dominican citizenship through naturalization. And now to respond directly to the question. The issue with Group A is that a lot of them still continue to not have access to Dominican nationality due to a number of different reasons. Firstly, there is administrative deficiency in regards to the implementations of identity cards. Among these other factors, we also find new requirements for documentation, including different kinds of international identity. Currently, there are no existing persons who have been naturalized. Apart from these more clear groups of A and B, we have the indirectly related group of the children of mixed couples. The main issue that arises is when the mother is of Haitian descent and has a Dominican father, because the Central Electoral Board tends to question the paternity of the father.
El problema consiste en que la Junta Central Electoral pone en duda la paternidad del padre.
Yo solamente quisiera hacer mención sobre el impacto que tiene.
I would just like to make an emphasis on the way in which this current situation has impacted many people in the Dominican Republic. These impacts appear in many ways, including not being able to retain or obtain a formal job, or not being able to access education given the lack of proper documentation. People are also not able to properly access Social Security and bank accounts, and this has effects across generations as young people and adults haven't been able to declare the birth of their children without their own proper documentation, as they haven't been able to access it. Among other things, they're also at great risk of being deported, even if they have no other citizenship. And this organization alone has 2 or 3 weekly cases, and it's just one of the many organizations that exist in the DR that manage these kinds of cases.
Solamente en nuestra organización, en el país hay varias organizaciones.
Rosa, could you speak a bit to when these issues around statelessness in the Dominican Republic began? What's the historic context?
So first we'd need to look at what the Dominican Constitution establishes until 2010 in terms of acquiring Dominican citizenship. Article 11 of the Constitution, which was valid up until 2010, had 2 ways in which one could become a Dominican. The first one was jus sanguinis, nationality based on the parent's nationality. But more important to this conversation, jus soli, which means being born on Dominican soil. And here I'll take a pause and make a very important distinction, because there have been many attacks saying children born to immigrant parents don't deserve and are not allowed to have nationalization by jus soli. However, the nationality of the children born of Haitian immigrants in the Dominican Republic is a constitutional right. The one exception that's highlighted within the Constitution is if the parents were in transit through the country. So, the migration law mandated by the Constitution for 2004 establishes a transit of a migrant through the Dominican Republic for a period of 10 days. This is to say that an immigrant that had been in the DR for more than 10 days was in a different status of immigration and no longer in transit. So Haitian migrants were actually recruited by the state of the DR and sugar companies to work at their sugarcane fields. Now, here, I don't make an exception because it refers to the children of diplomats, and the work occurring in the sugarcane fields had nothing to do with diplomacy. This is why we see that everyone who was born before 2007, which I'll explain later why before 2007, was able to register as a Dominican citizen independent of the nationality or status of the father. When the migrants were recruited and hired to work in the sugarcane fields, they were given a card and identification by the state. What happens is in 2010, the Constitution changes and conditions the jus soli. This is in response to a practice that was occurring that was contrary to the constitutional order. Now, before these changes, in 2007, Circular 17 was put into place. This prohibited civil officers from delivering copies of birth certificates that already existed, but this in practice only applied to those children of Haitian descent. And here I have to digress. The DR is an island, the product of a mixture, where we have a higher percentage of Afro heritage that we just do not want to recognize. However, this decision in practice only affects those of Haitian descent. This also helps contextualize and understand that is being discovered through the documentary. This is what's being discovered through documentary. Stateless, in which they go all the way back to 1937, where a genocide against the black people is committed in the Dominican Republic based on racial prejudices. Okay, now, going back to 2007, after the Circular 17 is circulated, Resolution 12 is created. This resolution has more power and more influence than the Circular, and this comes accompanied by the Foreigner's Book. So that's to say that in 2007, there were three main events. First, Circular 017, then Resolution 012, and the Book of Foreigners, also known as the Pink Book. So all of those children of immigrants born after 2007 and onwards were written down in that Book of Foreigners. And as of today, there is still no recognition of status. This has left thousands of children who are now young adults in a status of legal limbo. The situation's led young people to go out and make demands, along with organizations that supported them. They've been fighting for the restitution and for the return of the nationality that was slowly taken from them.
I go back to what Sister Maria Eugenia mentioned previously.
It's how do these changes translate into the practical lives of people being affected? You can't continue your studies after the 8th grade. And sometimes they'd only approve of your passing of the 8th grade depending on the school principal's willingness to send all of these exams and documents to the government. You can't continue with high school, and you don't have access to Social Security or medical services, but at the end of the day, women are the ones that are seen most affected. They're the ones that become one of the most vulnerable groups. If a woman doesn't have access to any sort of documentation, she's incapable of demanding justice for the paternity of any of her children. If she suffers domestic violence, she's unable to sue her aggressor. Even if the father has some sort of documentation, but the mother doesn't, this goes back to what Michael was saying about mixed couples, for instance, where if a mother doesn't have documentation despite the father having them, their children will have to have the fate of not having any documentation and no recognition according to the state. When these types of issues are denounced or complained against, people are often attacked and told that they're traitors. So how's this possible? How's it possible that in your own country you remain feeling like a foreigner and don't have access to mobility freedom just because of the color of your skin? And I don't want this to be misunderstood. Every person has the right to recognition despite anything. This doesn't make immigrants less than others. However, there is a sad reality that continues to exist in the Dominican Republic. Having dark skin and any sort of Afro-physical attribute is a symbol of Haitian descent, and you become a target for those immigration officers and systems. So many years of fighting within the hope that in 2013 the High Court would be able to bring solutions to thousands of Dominicans. However, this decision became the worst experience that we could have ever had. They retroactively denationalized us. It's almost like we went back 83 years. This was a political decision. This sentence, which legally has been one of the greatest damages that's been done in terms of legal material and context. And I'd like to close this section by pointing out that the damage has not only been for Dominicans of Haitian descent, but it could also affect other countries following in the Dominicans' footsteps. And this would be one of the worst consequences in terms of human rights violations.
De derechos humanos en materia de garantía de derechos sería el peor ejemplo que se pudiera tomar.
Michael, as a legal practitioner in this area, what do you see to be some of the current solutions for this massive problem, both of returning documentation and the fallout from not having documentation?
Sobre la pregunta me voy a referir.
So in terms of the question, I will answer this in terms of addressing what can be done from a legal perspective, given the current circumstances of the country. One of the main problems is the lack of accurate information and names of the mothers due to the obstacles during the declaration process. So for instance, they would use documents to declare their children, but the information on these documents would differ. A factor that contributed to this issue is that when these documents and IDs were given, they were Spanish-sized, given the language barrier, as Haiti is French-speaking. So this creates an incongruity between the documents that the mothers have versus the name that they have in the passport of their children. Depending on the degree of incongruencies, legal procedures may be able to be carried out, in which it is assumed that these people are different, and they would try to prove that they are the same person. These processes are often very costly, as in many cases a DNA test is needed to prove that these documents are all the same person. And in many occasions the individuals do not have access to these types of resources. However, this problem is not exclusive to those Dominicans that are descendants of Haitian immigrants. It also occurs among Dominican nationals themselves. So thanks to the support of Rayjon and ASCALA, many people have been able to go through these processes and have a DNA test. In order to resolve these cases, there is a very lengthy administrative process that is necessary that takes place through the central administration. But this often can be very time-consuming given the poor administration and backlog of cases. It is also important and should be noted that these cases only take place within the central region, but many clients live very far from this region, and thus it is very difficult for them to be able to follow up with their cases. It is very important to note that in many instances for Dominicans that have Haitian heritage, procedures that should be very easy can end up being hell for them. So going back to the government's categories of stateless people, for Group B, the solution is through a decree that was made to restore their nationality. But that has not happened. What I propose is the realization of the degree and the provision of nationality to all those 299 people who were supposed to be given it. These are some of the options that I can provide from the legal perspective. However, these are rather limited and they may require another form of action, including activists and political pressure to be able to have a better impact. Given the current state of affairs, it is necessary for us to take advantage of the solutions that the system currently provides us with and to look for other solutions that we may find fair.
Las soluciones que esperamos y que consideramos son las justas.
Rayjon and ASCALA have been working in partnership for years now in multiple domains. Can you speak a bit to exactly what ASCALA supports stateless people with?
Bien, desde un punto de vista legal, ASCALA brinda apoyo legal.
From a legal perspective, ASCALA provides support through the provision of lawsuits, as well as providing administrative support for the different groups. As mentioned before, some procedures that may be easy for most Dominicans can be overly complicated for those of Haitian descent. Among these administrative supports, we also find legal support within trying to obtain birth certificates as well. It can be said then that the additional activities and support that ASCALA provides go in hand with the administrative and legal support.
Yo solamente quería complementar lo que decía Michael.
I would like to complement what Michael has already mentioned in terms of the community part of it. We have various group programs encompassing young people and youth. And these programs include approximately 60 members of the community of migrants and Dominicans of Haitian descent between the ages of 14 to 30 years old. These programs particularly touch upon themes such as social and legal topics as well as leadership skills. We also encourage our program members to seek other livelihood strategies such as access to different services like healthcare and education. Healthcare particularly because many people cannot access this based on lack of documentation. Another thing that we talk to them about that tends to be an issue is the access to education, as many children are unable to access or register for school given the lack of certain number of documents.
O tienen trabas en la hora de inscribirse en las escuelas por no tener un documento.
Documentation is clearly a gateway to access to many aspects of what we see as everyday life. Can you speak more to how obtaining documents affects someone's life?
Prácticamente paralizar su existencia. ¿Cómo puede afectar la vida?
So the best way to explain how a person who's trying to regain their Dominican citizenship, the way to explain what they're going through, is to say that everything in their life becomes paralyzed. It's almost as if they didn't have a civil life. It doesn't exist anymore. First of all, it's difficult to accept being forced to give something up. Just to recall what we'd mentioned earlier, Group A had their documents taken away. And Group B, they were registered but actually not given documents in the first place. So in the case of Group B, they're forced and required to submit to a regularization plan for foreigners with the promise that 2 years later, they were going to be given naturalization. And this is, remember, this is in 2014. So it's basically a given that in order for anybody to obtain these documents, it's nearly impossible for them to obtain them because they're not foreigners from another country. They don't have a foreign birth certificate. They don't have foreign documents. They don't have anything to prove they were born in another country. And this is, let me take this opportunity to point out that this is one of the biggest errors which the Dominican state has made. It's that they gave a regularization card to those born in the Dominican Republic to say that they're actually Haitian nationals. With what right does the government give these people that were born within Dominican land a nationality that doesn't belong to them? I want to take this opportunity to again point out two elements that were talked about earlier, two elements that encompass the solutions to this problem. And the solution is for the state to return its constitutional and legal status. So what I mean by that is to return to what is established in the Constitution and to make certain that it's respected. This is where ASCALA and all the other organizations that support this cause come into play. But at the end of the day, there are thousands of people who are affected and thousands of people who are not supported by an organization and who don't have access to legal counsel. So the question remains, what happens to these people that don't have access to these forms of support?
We are very fortunate for organizations such as ASCALA and Rayjon because they help us correct errors.
Errors like material mistakes, misspellings, and other errors that have overall resulted in the negation and denial of citizenship and nationality. At the end of the day, in order to avoid this lack of access to education, in order to no longer fear going out into the streets and walking, in order to avoid expatriation, and it's important here to make a distinction because it's expatriation and not deportation. You deport someone who isn't born in that land, but expatriations occur when you remove someone from the land in which they were born. Basically, we need a state that's willing to respect and guarantee human rights and a state that's committed to going back to its legal foundation. At the end of the day, what we all should see and what we should all want to see is what I've experienced. All of these clients who've become professionals, they've become teachers and lawyers, they become policemen and medics. This is what we want. We want people who are able to serve their countries and their nation. We don't want to see them limited by their lack of documentation. It's all of these solutions that'll help us overcome hate speech, which is so divisive to our people. And these solutions, they require the commitment of the state and the commitment of the state's institutions in order to allow us to learn how to love each other and how to love our Afro heritage and how to be able to proudly recognize and love that we were born on Dominican soil.
El que yo no tenga que negar mi antecedente, mis ancestros, mi herencia afro, para hacer reconocer que nací en suelo dominicano, que tengo una parte dominicana.
As we close out our discussion today, I will ask each of you, what is the biggest lesson you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Que entiendan que una persona sin sus documentos
to understand that a person without documentation is a person without a civilian life. They cannot develop civilly. Also, to understand that what the Constitutional Tribunal did was a civilian genocide. I believe that the central point for the people listening is to understand and put themselves in someone else's place. It seems to me that the listeners also need to reflect and understand that it is not simply a judicial decision, but a political decision.
Judicial, sino, como bien decía Rosa, una decisión política.
Coincido con lo que decía Michael, me parece importante saber.
I agree with Michael. I think it's important to know that in the Dominican Republic, people have lived in a risky situation, a situation of statelessness and denaturalization for more than 8 years. And it has affected thousands of lives. And it's important that all the people listening know this, because many times beyond what I consider the best action or what can be done, the important thing is the life of these people that are being affected and that we find ways of solving them. A life that has a document, a family, kids that have documentation, there is a solution. There is an answer. It saves lives and it provides access to rights. Also, to know that the Dominican Republic is not just vacations and beaches. There is a social situation that the tourists and people that visit ignore. They come to visit the beach, but they don't know what many people are living. And these situations deeply affect the people, and that we need to do something about it. We know that when Sentence 168 was made and it was implemented, one of the things that really impacted positive change to the sentence was pressure from internal civil society as well as externally at the international level, with international organizations speaking out. This situation continues. It has not resolved, civil society has been weakened, and it has lost a lot. We are looking to sit down and dialogue with the state, but there's no response nor spaces for dialogue to resolve this situation. So we also need that pressure at the international level from outside, because many times we don't get it. Even if we have previous work done and community work, we can't get there. If we all work together on this, I think it's very important. The support that many local organizations provide is also very important, because people often do not have the ability to carry out solutions to their documentation. Carrying out, as Michael said, means a simple procedure, going to the registry office to register a child. It becomes very cumbersome. It can be very difficult because of the color of the skin, because of the last name, if it is Haitian, so a lawyer is always needed. I appreciate these spaces that exist to come talk about this problem, and we are open at the ASCALA for those who want to come to the Dominican Republic and want to know more about this reality. Our doors are always open to sit down, talk, visit, or talk with the people who are affected.
Quien venga a conocer o venga también a República Dominicana y quiera conocer más sobre esta realidad, nuestras puertas están abiertas para poder sentarnos, conversar, visitar, hablar con las personas que están afectadas, ¿no?
Me llevo la lección desde la importancia de unir nuestras voces. Unidos somos más.
I take away the lesson that it's so important to unite our voices, because united, we are certainly greater. I take away the lesson that we can't continue to silence a reality that affects so many people. Even if it's one person, we have to denounce it so as to not become accomplices through silence. I take away the lesson that prejudice, colorism, discrimination, racism in the Dominican Republic are very strong elements of denying the right to a name and a nationality. Look, in modern times, in globalized times, we see thousands of people submerged in a system of modern slavery just because of prejudice, stigma, just because of xenophobia. I take away the lesson that in 2013, our current president was with thousands of affected people saying that he believes in love, that he is also a descendant of migrants, and that they had to reconstitute that right. However, I feel so strange to see silence, this kind of opacity before a staggering reality. I don't know. I really don't know what happens to people when they come into power. I don't know what are the ties which prevent them from advancing in what, at some point had been their convictions. Both Haitian migrants and their descendants are forced to deny their origins. I have the firm conviction that rights are not a thing we have to beg for. They are demanded. And I think there is a social debt from the state to the thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent and with their ancestors. And I think that, as they said, political will is most certainly needed. We have to keep joining our voices. If you're from Canada, we have a diplomatic department to which letters can be sent claiming this is a pending issue to be resolved. If we have some kind of forum at a larger level, more people in which we can receive, whose testimonies we can receive that are living this reality, we need to make certain that we get it. Anything like this will help. But above all, the political commitment of the authorities to enforce the laws, because we've come a long way in making our voices heard. But if there's no commitment, if there's no political commitment to amend or to enforce the laws, we will always be at a standstill, unfortunately.
Si no hay un compromiso de hacer cumplir las leyes, desafortunadamente, estamos como que estancados.
We have to keep joining our voices. Thank you all for tuning into this podcast by Rayjon Sharecare. Friends, colleagues, and listeners, let's keep learning, growing, and collaborating. As a listener, we encourage you to start with the National Film Board documentary, Stateless, which follows the work of Rosa Iris and further discusses the legacy and historical context of the situation. Stateless is available to stream online at the National Film Board's website. You're also invited to visit rayjon.org/podcast for a list of resources and links to learn more about the situation of statelessness in the Dominican Republic, and where you will learn more about Rayjon Sharecare and our partners in the Dominican Republic. Also, find us on social media at Rayjon SC and our partners at ASCALA.ong. A massive thank you to Rosa Iris Alvarez, Michael Abreu, and Hermana Maria Eugenia, who gave their time and voices to our podcast today, and to inform you and spread awareness of the impact of statelessness. A huge thank you as well to those who lended their English voices, all of whom you can find more information in the show notes. Courtney Joshua and Josh Hollick of Kenya, Master students at Carleton's Migration Diaspora Studies program, and Maha Sammo, writer and poet whose work you can read at onefemalecanuck.ca. Let's work together and join our voices by learning more.